Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on Village Square Africa. Now, Nigeria's headline inflation rose to 28.92% in December for the 12th consecutive time in 2023, with the food inflation on a month-on-month basis was caused by a rise in the average prices of oil and fat, meat, bread and cereals, potatoes, yam, and other tubers, fish and milk, as well as cheese and egg. Now, what are the underlying factors responsible for driving this persistence in food inflation, and how can these challenges be addressed to stabilize prices and improve food security? Now, on the show today to discuss this further, we have Basil Abia, his co-founder, Veriv Africa, joining from Abuja. Hello, Basil. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, Dasha. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you. And we also have Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO Finance with Mukhtar, joining from Lagos, Nigeria. Hello, Mukhtar. Thank you so much for joining me as well.
Thank you, Darshan, for having me.
All right, gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you on Village Square Africa. Now, let me begin with you, Mukhtar. Now, are there any unforeseen factors, aside the ones we already know, that's actually driving the 2.72% increase in inflation from November to December?
Well, there's always things you didn't plan for when it comes to economic terms. You call it the uncertainty. Economics is driven with a lot of uncertainty. There's no certainty when it comes to economy because variables will have to change. I think we're seeing that what's happening, inflationary pressure, the major cause of inflationary pressure, I keep saying, is the exchange rate. Then secondly, you need to look at the cost of transportation, keep going high, especially most of these transporters are using diesel, which has been very, very high at about 1,000 plus. So those are one of those. Then again, you mustn't forget the insecurity challenges because most of the food basket of this country are suffering from insecurity challenges. So and that process, those challenges are risen over the months, especially between the month of November up till January. So a lot of farmers are not able to go to the farm. Then those are all for since before now we thought that was over. So, but majorly, I think the cost of most of this inflationary pressure we are seeing is exchange rate volatility. When you look at some of these, you see, look at the milk, cereal project, tomatoes, all these goods are things that we only have the product, we don't have the finished product. So if you have to do the finished product, you have to have the machineries to do it, and those machineries are not produced here. You have to bring them outside the shore of this country, and that will add to your cost of production. So definitely, it's a tough time when it comes to dealing with the monster inflation. But what is driving Nigeria inflation every quarter, every month, that seems to be exchange rate volatility, because today you are exchanging in the parallel market at 1,200. The next day you're exchanging at 1,400. Then even in the official market, it has not been stable. It's hovering between 1,000 and 800. So these are all foreseen circumstances. These are not things that are stable. So definitely inflation will keep going up.
All right, thank you for that, Mukhtar. Now let's come back to you, Basil. Now, Mukhtar did blame the reason for the inflation, the food inflation in Nigeria, majorly on the exchange rate volatility. What are your thoughts? Can you share with us your own ideas? Do you think that there are any other, factors, underlying factors that we may not know, we may not see, that's responsible for the, food inflation in Nigeria?
I think majorly, if you look at Nigeria's food supply deficit numbers, and I can start with the most consumed food commodity, which is rice. We have 7 million metric tons rice supply deficit, for instance. And where do we majorly import our rice? Obviously from our entropole state neighbors, Benin Republic. So if you're trying to do the math and you need some anecdotal evidence to give you an idea of what's happening, I think largely I would say the increase in energy prices due to the removal of fuel subsidy has, demonstrably showed that surge, or being a causative factor for the surge in the inflation, especially when it comes to food inflation. Because as you do know, 51% of the inflation calculation methodology That is currently being deployed by the National Bureau of Statistics, the NBS. Is comprised of aggregate food prices. And so when you're doing the math with our food supply deficit numbers, where do we actually get the imports from? In spite of the rice importation bans and some of the core commodity importation bans. The common sense is that the transportation logistics involved has to be borne by diesel supplied vehicles. And these diesels, as we do know, diesel has spiked up in the last 2 years. At some point, a liter of diesel 2 years ago was just under 200 naira per liter, and it's now about 1,200 naira per liter. So if you have that stark 800 to 900% increase, then you start to see where the situation is coming from. But aside from that, we're seeing our farmers reduce their cultivation acreage. We're also seeing, obviously due to insecurity, some people can argue that climate change degradation, climate change, I would say, physical land degradation, especially around the Lake Chad area, is also forcing a number of agriculturalists southwards to the Middle Belt. But we'll need to see very clear evidence in that sense. For me, I think energy prices has been the fundamental push behind the inflationary surge. And then secondly, of course, as I highlighted earlier, the reduction in food cultivation due to insecurity.
All right, thank you, Basil. Now let's come back to you, Mukhtar. Now, it's no news. A lot of people have actually complained over the years that purchasing power of the people keeps reducing, and so far it has actually reduced drastically. Now, can you tell us if there are any unexpected consequences or even ripple effects of this prolonged crisis, especially on household budgets, consumer purchasing power, and the overall standards of living in Nigeria?
Naturally, I think all those factors are being affected at the moment. When you look at Nigerian economic itself, is a consumer-driven economy. And so when consumers are not buying household item or product, then the company in terms will not be able to stay in business. And sometimes some of these companies do not stay in business. And when they are not in business, then you have to also look at unemployment will come to place, because most of those working in this company will lose their job. And when they lost the job again, then that will affect household income. That will also reduce purchasing power. And so definitely it's like a twin time bomb, all things happening at the same time. So definitely that is a big challenge for the companies, for individuals. And because households that used to buy maybe two household product, we choose to buy one and try to see how they can manage it towards the end. So that will affect the bottom lines of the company, like the Manufacturer Association have said today. So definitely it's affecting not just the household in terms of reduction, it's also affecting the company in terms of business patronage, and also is not creating that unemployment figure going up by the day. So it's a big challenge. And again, the president said they will be establishing a national minimum wage committee tomorrow that could also enhance minimum wage, maybe to meet up with inflation. Remember, there's a 30,000 that is being done, but again, that is in the federal levels. We've not seen anything from the state government yet. So what it means is that what the federals are enjoying, the state are not enjoying. So patronage, purchasing power keeps going down by the day. So I totally think we are going through those challenges as it stands now because of like I said, we're a consumer-driven economy, and the purchasing power of the average Nigerian is going down by the day.
Okay, Mukhtar. Now, Basil, you heard what Mukhtar actually said. He said it's not just the people that are being affected, even the companies are being affected due to low purchasing power. Now, how do you think this crisis is actually impacting these particular companies, especially the manufacturing companies or manufacturing industry, and also Nigeria's economic growth overall?
So if I just remove the factor of high energy prices from the equation and just look at dwindling purchasing power of the aggregate economy, you'd see that from from a pricing perspective, for instance, manufacturing companies are currently struggling to just stay afloat because every 3 to 4 months they have to upwardly review their prices, and that pricing obviously leads, as we do know, the price transmission effect is almost immediate. The aggregate number of consumers for their particular products starts to dwindle. So with that reduction, you start to see bits of reduction in production from the manufacturing companies, and then even downsizing. And now downsizing is actually rife across the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria. I highlighted earlier last week when I was talking here that the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria say that about 40% of their costing framework is actually borne by energy costs. And that is obviously going to increase now with energy prices still spiking, especially with regards to diesel. But outside of that, just the reduction in production due to dwindling purchasing power, we have started to see manufacturing companies, especially factories in Lagos, reduce production capacity by as much as 50%. So when production capacity is at 50% lower than the normal average across a manufacturing hub for Nigeria, therein you see the concerns. And with lower production, you start to see serious crunch issues, across
Basho, but how then can these businesses adapt to the realities of this high inflation?
Please, can you repeat the question again?
I said, how then can businesses adapt to the realities of of the high inflation?
So we are seeing that those adaptation, I would say, company policies. There's a term called sachetization. It is both a business term and is also a colloquial Nigerian term. So we start to see manufacturing firms start to put most of their products in sachet, just so the average consumer can still purchase their produce and they can still just stay afloat. So from commodity goods manufacturers switching to sachet for a lot of their products, you're even seeing high consumer goods, for instance. I know a number of dry gin companies are also doing a number of their components in sachet. I know that some wines and some very high-level drinks are also using sachet in that sense. So I think sachetization is a company policy that I would say companies are now deploying for adaptation with regards to dwindling the purchasing power of the aggregate economy.
All right, well, let's come back to you, Mukhtar. Now, with the number of multinational companies, leaving the country en masse, I want to hear from you how you feel, the local companies, especially the manufacturing companies, are supposed to adjust to the realities of this, high inflation, especially in terms of pricing strategies, supply chain management, and also investment.
Yeah, and actually, you should also know that these manufacturing companies are leaving Nigeria not because of profitability. They see profitability, but they are looking at their margin of profitability via the exchange rate volatility. We still get down back to that same issue. So that's why they are leaving Nigeria. It's not because they really want to leave. And again, when you talk about the local company taking advantage of it, it's neither end of them because it's also a big challenge for them. Because what these companies are doing, they are not saying they're not going to have their product here in Nigeria. But what you have is that they would rather import it because they think that will reduce the cost of doing businesses and that will bring on their profit margin. So they are only just to bring it, you clear it, that cost is on you. So they just pay for the production, you pay for the production and shipment cost will be included in those that will have to, the end users here. So they'll stay here, but they are not going to be manufacturing here. So if you're a local and you are trying to manufacture that product from here, then you know that the cost of those products is always higher than what they brought in from outside. So that's a major challenge. So they need to look at trying to bring down production. Bring down costs. And if you tell of bringing down costs, it's going to be a very challenging time for them because when you look at cost of energy, like we've mentioned already, then you look at the exchange rate. Also, we've mentioned that already. And also, you look at the supply chain in terms of transportation movement that also we've mentioned already. So it's a big challenge for local businesses to really be able to strive in a time like this. And so the only way they could all survive now is you begin to cut down overhead costs. And when it comes to overhead costs, the first place you want to cut your overhead costs has to do with your manpower. You're looking how you can reduce your manpower. And that again is going back to the unemployment, throwing more people into the unemployment market. So price stability, I don't think we'll achieve that again. And you mustn't forget the cost of funding also. The cost of funding is also high because interest rate is high. So all these factors are playing in almost all at the same time to impact inflation, to impact cost of these goods and services. So it's a very big challenge as it
All right,
stands
Mukhtar,
now, and it
still
will take
talking
a lot
about some
to
factors that, are impacting the inflation. Basil did talk about, climate change and also environmental degradation, especially coming from the Lake Chad region. I want you to tell us, just share more or enlighten us more on that and how it has actually affected farmers and worsened the inflation challenges.
I think that basically is happening in the Lake Chad region, especially, I mean, when you looked at those household, when you look at those inflationary pressure, there you saw something like fish, meat, we get it from all these regions, especially the Lake Chad region. So we're not getting there, we're getting it there. And also the climate change is a big factor, but majorly I think we also have the insecurity challenge that is happening in that part of the country. So climate change is one. But because again, farmers are not able to go to farm to produce the way they want to produce like they used to do before, because of climate change challenges that have to do with drying up of the Lake Chad region, that place almost dried up, and then coupled with insecurity challenge. So you continue to see the price of some of those goods that comes from that side, especially when we talk about tuber food and also fish and meats.
Okay. All right, Basil, now let's talk about the role of technology and also digital solutions. So many stakeholders have actually, called for urban farming, community gardening, or even GMOs as alternative food sources, as the response that Nigeria actually needs to curb inflation. Do you agree with this? And where are we on, technology?
Sorry. I completely agree with mechanization as an adoption policy for us. We need to do that as fast as we can. I will give you a statistic that just explains to you the situation that we're in. 90% of the food produced in Nigeria are produced by rural farmers. And we all know the contextual state of things right now in Nigerian agriculture. Most, or I would say an overwhelming majority of rural farmers in Nigeria still use their hoes and their cutlasses for farming. So these rudimental ways of engaging in agriculture is leading to us having below sub-Saharan African average when it comes to cultivation numbers or yield per hectare, for instance. We have lower yield per hectare than Mali. We have lower yield per hectare than a number of countries that, no offense intended, we should not be peers with in Africa. But we have those numbers because we're indulging in, I would say, 1800s agricultural technology. So yes, mechanization has to be sped up. What is the current state of our lift off when it comes to mechanization? I will tell you right now that it's next to nothing. That would mean that for some instance, we will need to start to see the Ministry of Trade and Investment start to look towards Brazil, Indonesia, and Malaysia to get in investors who are willing to come and set up medium to mega-sized farms with the right incentives. That's the only way to be able to lift up those numbers. And when you start to see that, you now start to see precision agriculture come into place. Precision agriculture basically is the adoption of technology in seed spacing, the selection of the seedlings themselves, the planting spaces between the plants. When you reduce it, and then of course you start to see the yield numbers start to increase. Obviously, also we start to see dry season farming come into play. How can you have two great rivers in Benue and Niger, and you barely indulge in dry season farming, for instance? So a lot of the things that we do are actually the logical causative factors for why food inflation is sky high, for why local production is sky low. Sorry, not sky low, sea low. In the depths right now. And so for us to be able to ramp up local production, we'll need to incentivize private capital. Secondly, we also have to make sure that we cater for the insecurity situation that we're currently having, that is now democratized. Every single part of Nigeria has one form of insecurity or the other. So if you're sorting out insecurity, then you start to see investors pay attention. But you have to get the incentives right. You have to treat agriculture as a business. You have to treat the value chains as set aside markets, and then you have to govern those tools with those private sector market tools. When you start to see that, then you start to see agro-entrepreneurial mechanization boom up and food productivity will spike up. But right now, current state of things, just paperwork, just a number of policy documents since the Buhari administration and Tinubu administration are continuing with that. But execution-wise, nothing to write home about.
Absolutely, Basil. Thank you so much for joining me on Village Square Africa and giving your insight on this topic. Well, that was Basil Abia, co-founder Verage Africa, and also Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO Finance with Mukhtar. Thank you so much, gentlemen, once again. We appreciate you for your time.
Thank you, Dasha. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for staying with us. Now, the decision by the Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to leave the ECOWAS was announced in a simultaneous joint statement on their national television channels. This was actually announced, which some quarters actually see as a blow to the bloc's regional integration efforts, even after it suspended, the three following the coups. Now, there seems to be a clash of interest here where the three countries are former French colonies who have resisted and cut ties with the French, while the head of the sub-region, Nigeria, is in bed with France. Now, people are actually asking, how will this decision affect the lives of the people in these three countries? Now, to discuss further on this, we have Tamsanka Zhu. He is an African affairs analyst joining me from the United Kingdom. Hello, Tamsanka. Thank you so much for joining me on Village Square Africa.
Hello, Dashan. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to your listeners.
All right. So now, first of all, how do you interpret the significance of these countries' departure from ECOWAS, especially in terms of the organization's ability to maintain cohesion and also to address the political crisis within the region?
It is very significant, Dashan, because if you remember the whole genesis, the reason why ECOWAS was formed was primarily for economic integration rather than political. The other things and branches and portfolios came after because there was a realization that security, political stability, all these things do affect the economic integration and viability for the region. So if you have three very important members of the regional bloc saying that they don't have confidence in the authenticity of the bloc in solving West African problems, if there are allegations that it is being controlled by people from outside Africa and West Africa in particular, then that is very, very damaging, especially with what we know in the history of what the region has been throughout in its effort to resolve the conflict in that place.
Well, Tamsanka, now, but according to the bloc's treaty, it says that member states wishing to withdraw must give a written 1-year notice, or if they don't give it, they must, be ready or continue to abide by its provisions during the year-long period. Now, do you have an idea if these three member states have actually done that?
Well, it won't make any difference.
It
won't make any difference because you can't really force someone to stay in a marriage they don't want to be in, especially if you've already suspended them and put them on sanctions and say that you don't want. So whenever anybody, in other words, where are the other members of ECOWAS going to go to try and force these three countries to remain as members after suspending them, after putting sanctions on them, after saying that you don't want them to sit in the same room? It's very, very difficult. At the same time, you have to realize that there's a danger that when you look, except for Nigeria, maybe Ghana, Senegal, that's having elections very soon, maybe Cote d'Ivoire to some extent, the rest of those members are struggling to have that political stability, and they're vulnerable to things that happened in Mali, Burkina Faso, and other places as well.
Okay. Now, I'm just being told that Dr. Omololu Fagbadebo, a research associate joining from Ondo State, has actually joined us. Hello, sir. Thank you so much for joining me on Village Square Africa.
It's okay. If that is resolved, I think whatever this want is no.
Okay, all right. So when we reconnect with him, we'd actually continue this. Now, still talking about this Tamsanqa. Are there any legal instruments that the ECOWAS can actually use to resist the move of these three states from leaving the ECOWAS?
Well, okay. So Dashin, the way it works is when countries make sovereign political decisions, there is nothing at international law that can do to force them to remain members of any particular body. ECOWAS, the United Nations, Commonwealth, or any other body that nations make a sovereign decision to join, they will do that within the context of international law. And what that says is it's a voluntary club that you join. You really can't force members to go into any particular relationship. So the only thing is the ECOWAS, the remaining members of ECOWAS can go to the African Union and try to raise these issues and then say, well, there's a threat to regional security. And then these countries will say, well, if you want to talk about regional security, the impact that will have on the Sahel and other things, and you are fearful that if there are problems in Mali, that those problems will be problematic to Mauritania and other countries. If the problem in Niger, that will affect Nigeria, Chad, and other countries. So that can be handled with ECOWAS on one hand, and these member states sitting at the same table to resolve those specific ad hoc issues. But there is no legal instrument that can be used to force a sovereign member to remain as part of a club.
All right, Tamsanqa, we'll actually come back to, the insecurity and the Sahel. But for now, still talking about this, how do you think that the ECOWAS should actually respond to this? Because they've actually come out to say that they're yet to get, a direct formal notification from the three member states. How do you think they should respond to this, especially regarding the fact, that they've actually been accused of injustice, on the sanctions that they've actually imposed on these countries following the military takeover?
Politics and power is a game of numbers, Deshan. So it is better and more advisable for ECOWAS to reach out to Bamako and the other capitals to try and get them back on the club, listen to them. If the issue of sanctions is what they are talking about, then those things can be spoken about because you don't want to punish the citizens of these countries. Burkina Faso, there are people that are arguing in West Africa in particular that say that when you look back to the 80s, what Thomas Sankara was trying to do, that Pan-African way of self-reliance is a political journey that was stopped midway, probably when Blaise Compaoré took over, and a lot of countries in West Africa had administrations that were, in good books with Paris and London and other capitals of former colonial masters. So there's a danger that if the ECOWAS leaders don't listen to what these three countries are saying, they can be going against the grain of political motivation within their own countries. And that could be problematic, which is why I was saying that except for Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, I can't quite see the rest of the countries being strong enough to resist a possibility that there could be coups or change of administration that is against neo-colonialism, if that was the right word to use.
That could actually been, detrimental. But then, let's take a look at the economic, social, and political consequences that might actually arise from the withdrawal of these countries from ECOWAS. And not forgetting the fact that, these three are also members of the 8-nation West African Monetary Union, that's the UMO, which uses the West Africa franc currency pegged to the euro. Now, after 49 years, how do you assess the impact of the withdrawals on the broader West African community, and also the 15-member regional bloc where, goods and citizens are able to move freely?
You have to recall that, as I already indicated, when the military administrations came in, that they wanted to, move away from the kind of relationship that they had with France, with Paris, with the administrations in Paris. So the monetary union and the political environment, the reliance on the post in the 60s, when most of these Francophone countries were getting independence, they had agreements with France with respect to their resources, the opportunities, the right of first refusal, the military assistance and security issues, and then the monetary issues. So these countries were already indicating that they want to move away from that. And the grain within that region is that, when you go back to those monetary union discussions that the other administrations were having, it's already something that's on the table. And with Ghana going to have a change in administration, Nigeria has already had a change in administration. The places like the Gambia, you have already shown that things are not working. Cote d'Ivoire, you are having a change of administration. Senegal, you're having a change of administration. So I think it is likely that these countries will say they don't care what the other members will say. They think they are right in making sure that these sovereign countries, the Francophone in particular, or monetary union members to be specific, are retaining their right to keep their resources, to divorce from France, looking after their resources as if they were still in probably the crash of sovereignty, if you like, because France would have been doing that, thinking they can't. These African countries can't look after their own money, their own resources, their own security. But this is what these three countries are specifically arguing, especially the reason why those coups happened in the first place. Dashan?
All right, so Tamsanka, let's go back to insecurity that you were actually talking about earlier. Now, it's no news that ECOWAS is actually a major contributor to the anti-terror war in the Sahel. Yet, Niger's head of transitional government, that's Abdurrahman Chiani, actually accused the organization of notably failing to assist them in their existential fight against terrorism and insecurity. Now, what do you think this withdrawal would actually do to the collective security efforts in West Africa, especially in the context of counterterrorism and also peacekeeping in the Sahel region?
It could work to bring political solutions, because remember, the reason why there are those military groups or militias or rebels or terrorist organizations, if you might want to call, whatever name you give them, in most cases, the reasons they exist is because there's an issue of self-determination, or there's an issue related to the economics, the poverty alleviation. There's a reason why a lot of these young men in particular are drawn to join these militia groups and rebel organizations. So there's one thinking that once their problems are solved, if people are no longer languishing in poverty, if their issues are addressed, then they are not likely to be members of these terror groups. And so there is a likelihood that there could be a different approach of saying, let's, rather than trying to crush them, let's listen to them and address their issues, and that could solve the problems. And also the reliance on France or in America and other countries who have interest in these countries might have been muddying the responsibility of these capitals in the first place. So when they say they are going to stand alone, now these countries know that it's them that have to solve these issues. Whether they are following a political route or they are following a military route, it is their responsibility. And so the decisions that they take in all their capitals. It has to follow that a solution is needed, and they might take a different approach and succeed rather than follow what France would have wanted, because the French would have said it's them that have soldiers on the ground. The Americans would have said it's them that have the army on the ground. Dashin?
All right. Now, Tamsanka, there's actually, a certain fear that if this particular move succeeds, that it will propel other nations from following, the same path. How do you think this would actually impact this move? How do you think it will impact on the credibility of ECOWAS as a regional actor on the global stage? Do you think ECOWAS will be able to uphold its relevance and influence in light of this?
You have to look at the alternative. The alternative has been a democratic system that has not necessarily delivered in more than 60 years in most of these countries. So when you go back to the post-independence, there are a lot of people, when you listen to these young military leaders, they are saying that the neo-colonial system that they had in place was simply having elections to elect a puppet of Western administrations. And these Western puppets, in their view, and these are their own words, they have not necessarily addressed the issues of those particular countries. Take Niger as an example. They were arguing that they were providing uranium and other minerals to Western governments who are, having a way to build their own power stations, to help their own economies. But the people in Niger are still very poor. And so there are many that are arguing in West Africa that the multi-party democracy as imposed by the West does not necessarily deliver or change the lives of the people in West Africa, because they still languish in poverty despite electing governments and fighting between one party and the other throughout the election period. So maybe they are right, maybe they are not, but it is a question of the test of times. So you will see this discussion happening in Togo, you will see it happening in the Gambia, you will see it happening in the other countries that are soon to change administrations. Ghana and Nigeria, maybe not so much. Senegal is not clear. But even if you look at Yahya Jammeh was taken out in the Gambia, it doesn't necessarily show that the Gambia is better off under Adama Barrow and others who were elected. There's no change that most people are feeling with these administrations.
I really wish we actually had more time to discuss this very interesting conversation, especially, in preempting the likelihood of future withdrawals. I would actually have loved for you to tell us what strategies ECOWAS can actually employ to address the root cause of, political instability and also military coups in the region, but maybe next time. Thank you so much, Tamsanka Zhu, for joining me at this time to discuss this, African Affairs Analyst. Joining me from the United Kingdom. Thank you for joining us on Village Square Africa.
Pleasure.
And with that, we've come to the end of Village Square Africa.